Now I think if we're going to talk about wetlands, we've got to get a definition of a wetland. A wetland is a place where land meets water. What makes it different from just, let's say, the surf hitting the sand is that they come together and you almost get water and soil together. So you're getting this muddy or wet sandy area where now plants have the ability to grow. If it's just a beach where surf is hitting sand, that doesn't always happen. It has to be a place where plants can now grow and form some kind of wetland, whether it's a marsh or a swamp or a bog. We have all of them on Long Island. So it's very hard to pinpoint talking about one. But wetlands may be contain the most life of any ecosystem. Not the most different kinds of life, like the pine barrens, but the most life. If you sat there and counted all the plants, and all the animals, and all the microscopic organisms, it has the most what we call biomass, the most total life of any place. And what does that tell you? It's rich in nutrients. Because the water keeps hitting the land, and this mud or soil starts to absorb all this. It becomes like a sponge, and it absorbs all the nutrients, allowing lots of things to grow there. One of the things that's kind of unique about wetland areas, though, is that you get what's called anaerobic bacteria. Instead of the bacteria that uses oxygen on land, this is bacteria that can't use oxygen, so it has to find another way to create energy. So therefore, if you've ever been near a wetland at low tide, you smell that wonderful bacteria smell. They give off hydrogen sulfide, like rotten eggs, when they break down materials. So their responsibility is to decompose or rot the grasses that die, or the plants that die in the wetlands, and the animals. But because it's rich with nutrients and lots of plants grow, now you've got the situation with all these plants that are growing. They're bringing lots of animals for cover, for food, and for places to raise their young. And wetlands are vital to the survival of this island. And people didn't know that when they first came here. They were smelly places loaded with mosquitoes. They have to be gotten rid of. Look, Kennedy Airport is on what was once a wetland. They filled the whole thing in to build the airport there. So they didn't really have much of a thought about how biologically important it was. It's a storm buffer. If it's a salt marsh, which are the ones along the coast, it's a storm buffer. That means if we get a hurricane hit and there's no marshes, inland is in much more danger than it would have been without these marshes to protect it. They almost act like it's hitting something that can slow it down. That's what the marshes do. They slow down the surf and keep it from being as much of a problem inland. They also become a nursery for babies, especially fish. Our whole fishing industry would probably go down if it weren't for salt marshes, because the young fish come in amongst these grasses and in these little tidal pools that are left behind when the tides go out, and it gives them a home until they grow big enough to go out with the tide and survive in the deeper water. So you can imagine the fishermen would not have had large fish. They would have baby fish to grow into large fish if they didn't have a wetland to protect the babies. It also becomes a sponge, which we already talked about. It soaks up lots of nutrients, because one of the most let me rephrase that. It becomes one of the most rich places for life on Long Island. And the last thing is it's a strainer. And nobody thinks of this one. Wetlands have the ability to take pollutants and make them harmless and safe for the life that's around them. Now, if you flood a place with pollutants, that's not going to work. The wetland can only do it at a certain rate. We can't keep adding things and hope that we're going to be saved. So it has a few purposes that we didn't even know about, and now we know, and they're protected all over Long Island now. And wetlands draw all kinds of bird life. They become a migratory stop for birds that are flying along the coast because they're so rich with food supply. So our migratory birds. Imagine going 10,000 miles without a place to eat or have a place to go to the bathroom or something. Our rest stops along the interstates. So that's what it's like for the birds. They need these places to stop over to get what they need, so that they don't lose all their energy and not be able to make the whole trip. So it's a great stop. So you see things like egrets and herons and kingfishers and sandpipers and all kinds of bird life. The ducks that come through from the north in the winter. You see all kinds of bird life at marshes. And mammals too. Raccoons will come down and take advantage of the food. and the grasses are food supplies. I know at one time they used to bring the cows down to eat the cord grasses that are in the marsh. They're rather salty, which is another cool thing, because cord grasses, because they live in a marsh, which is underwater under the tides for half the day, the grasses had to learn how to get rid of salt. Now, learn's probably the wrong word for a plant. They had to find a way to get rid of salt. So they have glands in the blades that get rid of salt. And you can take the blade and put it against your tongue and taste the salt. Those are the saltwater, that's the saltwater marshes. We have bogs on Long Island. They're called cranberry bogs because cranberries grow there. They're the ones that are covered by peat moss, and if you walk on them, it feels like you're walking on a sponge. It's not like the other marshes where you can actually see the water. It's filled in with sphagnum moss, and you can walk, well, carefully walk on it. You might sink. So that has its unique life of its own. Those types of wetlands have carnivorous plants living in them, like pitcher plants and Venus flytraps. Because there's so little nutrients in the marshes, or so little nutrients in the soil for the plant to absorb, they have to eat insects to get what they need. It's kind of a wild thing. So there's other, and we also have real marshes here, real swamps here, which swamps are defined because trees grow in the water. So we have all three kinds of wetlands on Long Island: marshes, bogs, and swamps.